Hey guys, how we doing? We're gonna get started here in just a minute. Ooh, we're doing weird things over here. While you guys are waiting for me to get started, if someone could just type something in the chat so I can see if it's working. Perfect. All right, we're working. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing started. Good evening. Coming to you live from my living room. Hope you guys are doing well. Tonight's job, we're going to try to review for tomorrow's exam, covering 1800 to 1848, also known as Period 4 in AP US History. Oh, here we all go. All the hellos. I love it. Now remember, there is a lag between me being live and what you guys actually see. I think it's about a 15 or 20 second lag. So don't worry if you ask a question or something. I will get to it. Hopefully not coughing too much tonight. I've already started, but took the cough medicine. Hopefully that'll take care of it. Typically I stop once I leave school, but it's continuing. So we'll just deal with it. So like I said, tonight, 1800 to 1848, I was looking at the PowerPoint that I use typically for the review. It's not very long. It's only about 4 or 5 slides. So, I'll do my best talking through everything. If you think I forget something or you want me to cover something more in depth, please don't hesitate just to go ahead and put something in the chat and I'll get on it right away. I got my phone here. If for some reason you can't type in the chat, you can send me a text message via Remind. I'll try to hop onto it and see it. I'll try to watch both at the same time. But I got to be honest, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screens going on my 2 monitors here, plus my phone. So that's 6. And I think once you go over 58 years old, you shouldn't have more than 3 different windows open. But we'll see what happens. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me get over here to the PowerPoint. We are starting in 1800, and 1800 is going to start with the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. But to understand why it was so important, his election, this revolution of 1800, we need to go back a slide. Let me see if it'll let me go back. Probably not. There we go. Yeah. Go back to John Adams' presidency, because during John Adams' presidency, he kind of left a mess for Jefferson that he's going to have to deal with. And that was the appointment of all those judges with the Judiciary Act of 1801. Remember, that Judiciary Act basically created all these new federal judge seats. And Adams is going to appoint a whole lot of new judges, primarily to keep Federalists in the U.S. government, because with the election of 1800, we see a shift from a Federalist-controlled government to a Democrat-Republican-controlled government. And so the whole thing with the Judiciary Act of 1801 was to bring in more justices. Well, what's going to happen is that's going to be what Jefferson has to deal with right away, is all these new judges that didn't get their appointments. So that's going to lead us to creating the power of the Supreme Court as we know it today. So let's go ahead and get started. We know that the election of 1800 was a mess in itself. We know that Thomas Jefferson is going to defeat Aaron Burr, a fellow Democratic Republican, as a result of 36, 37 votes in the House of Representatives, because we did not see a clear-cut winner in the Electoral College. We had 4 different candidates running. We had Jefferson, Burr, we had Adams, and we had, was it Pinckney was running. And they take the top 2 if they don't get a clear winner, and the top 2 were Jefferson and Burr. Well, Jefferson is going to win based on the vote, all the votes in the House of Representatives. And once he wins, he becomes president. Aaron Burr becomes vice president. It's going to be because of this election that the 12th Amendment is going to be passed. The 12th Amendment basically states that the president and vice president have to be on separate ballots. You can't run for one where first place gets presidency, second place gets vice presidency. You have to vote for each of them individually. So that's what basically is going to lead to what we call the Revolution of 1800, which refers to basically the shift of political ideologies from Federalist to Democratic Republican. And why this is so important, guys, is we talked about it in class, and I talked about it in the videos, and we take this for granted today. The idea that political parties within our system can switch in control, and there's never a shot fired, that it's a peaceful transition of power. And so this was the first time that this happened in our history. So that's why we call it a revolution, because this is a big change, okay? Jefferson's going to come in and he's going to bring in this whole new ideology, Democratic Republicans. Remember, the Democratic Republicans primarily wanted a less influence of a central government. They wanted more power going to the states. They wanted, people like Jefferson wanted an economy based on the agrarian lifestyle or agriculture. And so this is what's going to drive how he governs. Now, one of the first big things that we know about is going to be that Louisiana Purchase. Sorry, went too quick. The Louisiana Purchase. And like I said, guys, I don't have many slides, so basically I'm just going to tell the story, and this is going to be almost the whole story of Jefferson's presidency right here on this one slide. The big purchase, Louisiana Purchase, 1803. We purchased this land from France, and when we got it, we weren't trying to get Louisiana. We were trying to get New Orleans, because remember, Spain had control of New Orleans right before 1800, and we had a treaty with Spain called Pinckney's Treaty that allowed us access to the New Orleans port, allowed us a right of deposit in New Orleans. Well, when Spain returns the Louisiana Territory to France, that treaty becomes null and void. And because of that, Jefferson is going to send representatives over to France to try to purchase the New Orleans port, to buy New Orleans. And he was authorized to give $10 million for New Orleans. About the same time, Napoleon is dealing with high cost of trying to control the entire world. There had just been a slave revolt down in Haiti, the one little piece of land that France controlled in the Caribbean, and the Haitian slaves basically overthrew the government there. And so Napoleon's like, really, do I want to go over to North America? And lo and behold, here the Americans offered him $10 million for New Orleans. And so he comes back and says, hey, better yet, instead of $10 million for New Orleans, why don't you give me $15 million? I'll give you all of Louisiana. This is going to double the size of the United States, and it feeds totally into Jefferson's view of this agrarian style of economy. Remember, when you looked at the trade relationship that Jefferson wanted with other countries, he wanted to kind of stick to that idea of mercantilism, where we could send our raw materials over to Europe and then buy finished goods from them. And, so that raw materials are all our agricultural products. So purchase in Louisiana gives us all this more propensity for more agricultural products to trade with. So he does it. He buys it. Big problem, though. Does he have the authority to do it? Another big foundational belief of the Democratic Republicans is a strict interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. And I don't recall anywhere in the Constitution, I've read it a couple times, but I don't recall anywhere where it says the president has the authority to go buy land, to make real estate deals. Well, Jefferson was kind of between a rock and a hard place. I mean, does he make this incredible deal buying all this land for 3 cents an acre? Or does he stick to those Democratic Republican values? Well, we know he ends up buying the land, and Congress basically covers for him because they approve the sale retroactively. when he comes up and says, yeah, I know you said 10 million, but I spent 15 million. And they're like, bro, you kind of went away from the Constitution. He's like, yeah, I know, but look what I got. And then it's like, oh, okay. So they're like, what Jefferson did was fine. Did he veer away from his, strict interpretation of the Constitution? Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes politicians, sometimes leaders have to make decisions based on what's good for the country. And that is part of the president's job. So he doubles the size of our country. And now it's like, we got to see what's there. And that's where the Lewis and Clark expedition comes in. The Corps of Discovery was their name. And Lewis and Clark are going to start this exploration of the western part of the present day United States. They didn't just stick to the Louisiana. They are actually looking for a water passage to the Pacific Ocean. We're still looking for that elusive, water route to get us over to Asia quicker, believe it or not. Now, they're going to have the assistance of Sacagawea, a Native American from a Shoshone Indian from the Idaho, Wyoming region, more Wyoming, I think, because, it's just better. But she is going to be their guide. She and her husband, she's going to guide them through. A lot of explorers are going to be part of the Lewis and Clark expedition, and then they will break off and go on their own. And we see during this time period, new trails are going to be created, new ideas are new, we're going to come into new contact with new peoples, new animals, new plants, all this stuff. And that's kind of going to fuel the fire later on for Manifest Destiny. But that's the next test, so I won't go too far into that. So really, Jefferson's first term looks really good. I mean, he made this great deal. He doubled the size of our country. Everybody is happy. Well, then we're going to get into his second term. And his second term, we're going to start seeing some problems. And the problems deal with what's going on in the rest of the world. Now, Jefferson, like Adams before him and Washington before him, believed in maintaining a system of neutrality. Yeah, he wanted to help the French out where he could, but he also now as president sees that we're really not in the position to get involved in the war. So what he basically says is we are going to remain neutral. We're going to keep trading with everybody, and we expect everyone to respect our neutral position. Well, the problem is that England doesn't want France to get any trade goods or any supplies, and France doesn't want England to get any supplies that they can use to make them stronger, and we're the ones supplying a lot of these supplies. So both France and England try to prevent that. One way that they do it is England puts the blockade around France. Now, their goal with the blockade was to basically stifle Napoleon and keep it more of a continental style war and keep him from coming to England. But that blockade keeps out our ships and our trade. The next thing we're going to see happening is the impressment of our sailors. Both England and France do this. France is going to stop, but both of them, what they do is literally they are stopping our trade vessels, and they are trying to, they board our ships, and then they take sailors off those ships and press them into service, for their navy. Specifically, more so England than France. England would claim that our sailors had deserted the Royal Navy, and that's they were bringing them back. This is going to lead to Jefferson having to make a decision. How do we deal with, this situation? So he is going to pass the Embargo Act of 1807. Biggest economic blunder ever. England had passed their orders in council. France had their Berlin Decree. They all basically saying, who they would trade with, who they wouldn't. Orders in, when they did that, Jefferson said, you have to, respect our neutrality. And in their actions, England and France said, no, we don't. We're at war, and your ships are helping out the other guy, and we got to stop that from happening. So that's when Jefferson is going to pass the Embargo Act of 1807. He basically says, if you're not going to respect our neutrality, then we're not going to trade with anybody. And he cuts off all trade for the United States, incoming and outgoing. Big problem, especially for those folks who live up in New England, because they rely on trade. That is their economic, basis. And without that, they have no way to make money. They don't have agriculture up in New England, so they rely on trade with foreign countries. So the Embargo Act is going to be seen as incredibly destructive to the New England region. That's this cartoon down here at the bottom. That's what this cartoon is all about when it talks about, this cursed, oh, grab me. And we talked about in class how, or on the video, I think, how, oh, grab me spelled backwards is embargo. And what you started seeing happening was you started seeing a lot of these merchants up in New England starting to smuggle goods out, to try to trade out on the side because the embargo was not allowing them at all to do that. Anytime you see this cartoon, guys, you got to know it's about the Embargo Act of 1807. And that's all it's about. So just keep that in mind. But what this does is it just cripples our economy. And it's in this, Jefferson at this point just does not like being president at all. And so what we're going to see with his presidency is a really high with the Louisiana Purchase and then really low with the Embargo Act. And then within all of that, that's when we have the situation going on with the Marshall Court. Now, I mentioned to you about the federal judges that were appointed by John Adams. When Jefferson came in during his first term, he had to deal with all of these people out there who had been promised basically federal seats, judgeships on federal courts, and yet their appointment hadn't been delivered. In those days, you had to have the appointment in your hand. That paper had to literally be put in your hand, and now you're a judge. Without that, you don't have it. And so a man by the name of William Marbury is going to sue the then Secretary of State, James Madison, and said, hey, you need to deliver this appointment to me. And he goes to the court and asks the court to issue a writ of mandamus. And this writ of mandamus basically says it's an order for a government office, an order for someone they have to do something. Think of the word mandatory. You have to do it. A writ of mandamus means we're giving you an order that you have to do something. And so what William Marbury is asking, he's asking the courts to give a mandatory order to the Secretary of State that he has to deliver these appointments. The problem with that order is that it kind of goes against separation of powers. One branch of the federal government cannot order around another branch. That's the checks and balances and separation of powers. That's all, in the Constitution. It says you can't do that. So the very first thing, Marshall is going to do, John Marshall, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and interestingly, he was also an appointment by Adams in all those midnight appointments. The first thing he's going to do is say, well, number one, when you go back to the Judiciary Act of 1789, we're going to declare parts of that unconstitutional because the court does not have the power to govern or rule over another branch of government. So we cannot issue a writ of mandamus. So, the grand scheme of things, which I often think gets overlooked, is Marbury lost his case. He's not going to get the appointment. But what comes out of this is what John Marshall does is he steps up and he says, this Judiciary Act of 1789, when you hold it up to the Constitution and try to interpret this law based on the rules of the Constitution, it doesn't add up. It doesn't fit within the confines of the Constitution. And because of that, I am going to declare parts of that law unconstitutional. And what he did in that decision was he basically created the power, or didn't create it, but defined the power of the Supreme Court, which is the power to interpret the law. We call it judicial review. When the Supreme Court looks at a law based on the outline of the Constitution and determines whether or not that law meets the standards of our Constitution. This idea of judicial review, I'm not sure, guys, if I said it in my video, but I'm going to say it now. If you ever see a question about Marbury v. Madison, The answer will always be judicial review. That's the only thing we want you to know about this case, is that Marbury v. Madison equals judicial review. It's simple. And I don't care what test you take. I have never come across a test that talked about Marbury v. Madison and the answer wasn't judicial review. Or if they flip it and they have a question about judicial review, the answer is going to be Marbury v. Madison. I mean, just ingrain that in your head right now. I'll give you a second. Ooh, I can smell the smoke from the ingraining. That's awesome. Perfect. Okay. Two other cases you should be familiar with is Gibbs v. Ogden and McCulloch versus Maryland. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't think in my videos I talked too much in depth about these two cases, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on them in this review. Yeah, I'll go over that one as well, Tatiana. Basically, Gibbs v. Ogden was a case about who controlled the river between New York and New Jersey. You had two steamship companies, and both were awarded this monopoly of steamship travel between along the Hudson River there. And so they're going to sue each other. Each state is going to sue each other. Well, when you have two states that go that wage a legal battle against each other, that's what the Supreme Court hears. So in the excuse me, this cough medicine is not working. If you look at this, what John Marshall ruled was neither state has the authority to grant a monopoly because interstate trade, I-N-T-E-R-S-T-A-T-E, so I-N-T-E-R, interstate trade is controlled by the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which means that it is the power of the federal government to control trade between states. And so that is going to be his ruling. So anytime you see Gibbs v. Ogden, think Commerce Clause. It's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That's where you're going to go. The other one is McCulloch versus Maryland. Now, this one's interesting because McCulloch versus Maryland, you had the First National Bank. And they had set up they're there in Maryland, and what's going to happen is you're going to have the people, kind of some of the old states' rights folks, who are hanging on to the Articles of Confederation, and the states have more power than the federal government. And basically what they're going to argue is that, or what they're going to do is they're going to try to tax the federal bank. Well, the chief teller, who is kind of like the president of the bank, is going to sue Maryland, saying you do not have the power to tax a federal entity. And so this is going to go into the Supreme Court, and there Marshall is going to rule that the bank was absolutely right, that the states do not have the power to tax or govern the federal government. So what he's going to use is the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And the Supremacy Clause says that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And because the bank had been determined constitutional and the Supreme Court is the supreme law of the land, then by that means that, Maryland has no standing here. That they have basically, they cannot tax the federal bank. They can't do anything with the federal bank because it's a separate entity. Tatiana asked about Dartmouth College versus Woodward. Give me just a second here. I got to review that one real quick. It has to do with contracts. I know that. All right, hang on. All right, so Dartmouth College versus Woodward. Basically, what happened was the state, New Hampshire, tried to take over the control of Dartmouth College, basically saying it as a private college that the decisions that they were making should be overseen by the governor of the state. And so that, but what happened was there was a contract that was set up. And I'm doing a really poor job of explaining this. It's been so long since I've looked at Dartmouth College. I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. Dartmouth College was a private institution. And what happened was the state legislature of New Hampshire wants to make it a public institution. and in doing so transfer the power of decision making to the governor or the executive branch of the state versus the board of trustees, the privately hired board of trustees. And so what's going to happen is when the state tries to overtake the college, basically it's going to go to the court, and what the court is going to say is the state just can't come in. And they looked at, when people pay tuition and when they, signed applications or whatever for your college, they saw those as contracts. And so they say whether the Dartmouth College remains a public or a private institution, those contracts are still valid. So the state just can't come in and overtake a private entity and turn it into a public entity, if you will. So basically, it had to do with property rights and I'm sorry, Tatiana, I'm not explaining this well. Basically, a state government cannot come in and take over a private entity just because. The private entity is protected by its property rights. And so that's what Dartmouth College versus Woodward said, is that Dartmouth College as a private university cannot just be taken over by the state and turned into a public university. Once again, this one's more about commerce. So it's about contracts and it's about property rights. And so basically what the state of New Hampshire was trying to do was supersede the private ownership of the property by Dartmouth College. I don't know if I confused you more or not. If I did, I'll try again and try to give you a better explanation. But what it basically said was the state had no standing here. Okay? Yeah, that was ugly. I know. Sorry. And it's on tape, too. It's recorded. Gosh, I'm a horrible teacher. All right. One thing you need to remember also with regards to the Marshall Court. John Marshall is going to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court all the way through the 1830s into the early 1840s. Every decision he makes gives more power to the federal government. Okay? So when he makes a decision, the federal government gets stronger, gets more power. This really, guys, is what Adams was hoping for. John Marshall was a Federalist. He had been the Secretary of State under Adams' presidency. Now as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he is, basically building up the power of the federal government with all these decisions he's making. So, I guess John Adams still rules. I don't know. All right, the next one, that's going to take us into the 1810s. Jefferson is going to leave a mess behind for poor James Madison. James Madison is going to come in and he is going to, inherit the problems of the Embargo Act. We never solved the problems of, the impressment. We're still having our problems with the impressment of our sailors and all this other stuff. So what is James Madison to do? Well, the first thing he has to do is with the economics, because economically we are crashing fast. So they're going to try to pass some new legislation. One of the big ones you should be familiar with is Macon's Bill number 2. And Macon's Bill number 2 basically put it out there. Whoever respects our neutrality rights first, we'll trade with them instead of anybody else. And so between England and France, France actually steps up and says, hey, we'll respect it. So we say we're going to trade with France. We're going to end up trading with England very soon enough. So it doesn't really pan out that much. But we're trying. And James Madison is trying to do that. He did repeal the Embargo Act. He basically said we can trade with everybody except France and England. And then they passed Macon Bill number 2. So he's trying to do it. But then more problems are going to rise up. You have a lot of people, because of the impressment of our sailors and other things, a lot of people are going to be calling for us to go to war against England. In Madison's first term, because he takes office in 1809, and during his first term, he's focused more on economics. He's like, no, we're not going to get involved. I mean, we're economically unstable. How can we afford to go to war? So he's like, no, we're not going to do that. But then more things start happening. For example, the Chesapeake Leopard Affair. The Chesapeake Leopard Affair was a an exchange between the USS Chesapeake and the HMS Leopard. HMS His Majesty's Service, that is the English ship. They're going to come together, and the Chesapeake is going to refuse to be boarded, and they're going to fire shots at one another. And I think there's, you tell me, I think it was like something like 36 casualties or something like that on the Chesapeake. The Warhawks, these are the young men in Congress who want to go to war. They are going to start calling for us to declare war against England because they fired on our ship. We're still not there yet. We're not ready to go to war with England at this point. So we're still trying to avoid it. On top of that, so you have the impressment of our sailors. You have the Chesapeake Leopard affair. And then what happens is we're going to find out that the British are trying to incite the Native Americans on the western frontier. And how do we find that out? Well, William Henry Harrison, a general in the army, is going to go out because, believe it or not, the British are still on the western frontier. They never left after the American Revolution. And he discovers that they've been arming the Native Americans. The way he found that out was through the Battle of Tippecanoe. At the Battle of Tippecanoe, what happened was you had I believe a Shawnee Native American by the name of Tecumseh. And Tecumseh is trying to build a confederacy of Native Americans on the western frontier who are going to fight against the westward expansion. We're starting to expand further into the west. And so Tecumseh is going to build this confederacy with other Native Americans to try to push back against American expansion. Well, while Tecumseh and most of his young Native American warriors are out trying to build this confederacy, William Henry Harrison and his troops are going to attack Prophetstown, which is on the Tippecanoe River. And they're going to go and basically easily win that battle because all the best fighters are gone with Tecumseh. When they win the Battle of Tippecanoe, we discover all these English-made muskets, and we realize, or we seem to, or we kind of make the conclusion, thank you, that what they're trying to do is they're trying to arm the Native Americans on the west so they'll be able to easily fight against us. Well, when that word gets back to Washington, now we're like, oh, okay, this is getting bad because we're getting attacked in the Atlantic, and there's a really good possibility that we're going to get attacked in the West as well from the Native Americans along with the British. We really see the British as coming in and trying to basically retake the America back after, that we got after the American Revolution. So the Warhawks, these young congressmen, people like John C. Calhoun and Daniel Webster and Henry Clay, they start calling for us to go to war, declare war against England. And on top of that, not only are they saying because of the trade restrictions that we're up against, because of the impressments of sailors, because of the Native American incitement on the western frontier, we should go to war. But also, because if we go to war with Great Britain right now, this is going to be our American Revolution, our generation's American Revolution. And you know what we should do? We should go get Canada. Because wouldn't that be awesome? And Canada was like this big, pie in the sky for us that we wanted to go up and get and, extend our land even further. So the Warhawks actually, with Madison, they're going to, come up and declare war against England. That's going to lead to the War of 1812. A lot of people call the War of 1812 the Second American Revolution. Yeah, not really. It's just the second war that we had with Great Britain. It starts off ugly for us. It really does. I mean, we go to invade. Well, first of all, New England, totally against it. Want nothing to do with it. They say, we'll use our militia to defend our state. Our states up here, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, all these. But we're not fighting with you guys. So when the American army comes up and says, hey, we're going into Canada, all the state militias are like, hey, have fun. We're staying here. As soon as we get to the border, we're stopping. We invaded Canada. We got pushed back right away. The beginning of the war could have been a lot worse, but fortunately for us, England was still fighting with France over in Europe. But come about 1814, that war comes to an end. And now England can focus on what's going on here, and they're going to send troops over here. And the first place they go is Washington, D.C. And they are actually going to burn Washington, D.C. They set the White House on fire, the Capitol building. As a lover of history, as someone who just geeks out whenever I see historical documents and stuff like that, we lost so much in those fires. So many documents from the founding that you just got destroyed in the fires that were burning and stuff. And all the while James Madison was on the other side of the river just watching it burn. But that's going to be kind of the low point of the war. The high point's going to come real quickly with the attack on Fort Henry. The British are going to attack Fort Henry. Fort Henry will hold, and that's when Francis Scott Key writes the Star-Spangled Banner. The War of 1812 comes to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent. We called the Treaty of Ghent basically a status quo antebellum treaty because what we agreed to, England was tired of fighting. We weren't, this is my dogs here. Just realized they're not here. They're over there. We didn't have really anything more to give. So we both agreed, hey, let's just call it good and go home. And so the Treaty of Ghent is going to be signed on December 24th, 1814. Now, one of the biggest problems we had in the War of 1812 was we didn't have phones. If we'd had phones, we could have avoided a lot of events that are going to happen between December 24th and, say, January 15th. Several things are going to be going on. Number one, up in Connecticut, in Hartford, the Federalists are having what's known as the Hartford Convention, in which they are going to look to Congress. They're going to make some demands on Congress to make some changes to laws. They're going to, some of the laws they wanted to do is they wanted to change the rules for how you needed 2/3 votes to declare war, no draft, stuff like that. They're also going to be looking just basically to, increase the power of the central government. And they're going to make these demands on Washington, D.C., on the Congress, and they're going to, one of the rowdy ones is going to say, yeah, and if you don't pass what we want, we're going to secede. New England's going to secede from the Union. So they're threatening secession. Now, they thought we were still at war. So they thought Congress would, kind of bow to their wishes because Congress needed New England to help them in this war, and that's what they were thinking in their head. If they had had a phone, someone would have called and said, hey, we're negotiating the Treaty of Ghent right now. Don't do it. But they did it. They said, we're making these demands. If you don't live up to our demands, well, then we're going to secede. That was the end of the Federalist Party. They played their hand way too soon. And so that's going to be the end of the Federalist Party. Another thing that's going to happen is the Battle of New Orleans. Now, a lot of people are going to argue this was great for the United States, and I guess it was because it gave us a victory, but this is going to be the battle where Andrew Jackson becomes the American hero, and he is going to defeat the British in New Orleans, and he's going to defeat them handily. But again, this was in the first week of January of 1815. Had there been a phone, hey, Andy, war's over. Don't start this battle. Well, we didn't know the war was over, so boom, Battle of New Orleans. But this Battle of New Orleans absolutely has, a positive effect on America because what it does is it's going to elevate this idea of nationalism, this idea of being an American. And so when Americans hear about the Treaty of Ghent, they don't look at the conditions of the treaty, that there are no conditions. It's just like everything goes back to the way it was. They just see Treaty of Ghent signed, and we won the Battle of New Orleans. We won the war. And so this starts this huge spur of what we call Ghent nationalism, this wave of American nationalism that grows, that really unifies our country. And we begin using that moniker, an American. I'm an American. And so this Ghent nationalism is going to propel us through the rest of the 1810s. It's known as the era of good feelings. Now, as we come to the end of Madison's presidency, this is when he's going to look at our country and say, okay, we got to, make some changes in our country to, number one, build our economics, and number two, build our infrastructure and stuff like that. So Henry Clay is going to introduce what's known as the American system. Now, it's introduced under Madison's presidency. It includes the Bank of the United States, the second national bank of the United States, because the first national bank had expired. so the Second National Bank of the United States, infrastructure projects like roads and canals that we want to build, and finally, a new protective tariff that will help elevate American industry. Well, Madison is going to pass the bank and he's going to pass the tariff. He's going to veto infrastructure because he believes that infrastructure should be more of a state-run idea, that states could build their own bridges, states could build their own roads and stuff like that. But what this does is this starts what we call the era of good feelings. And the era of good feelings is going to be overseen by the presidency of James Monroe. James Monroe, the fifth president of the United States and the last of the Virginia dynasty. He is the end of the what I call the revolutionary generation of presidencies. And he's going to come in the era of good feelings, and there's going to be some pushback from some on the American system, especially the infrastructure. The infrastructure is going to be very valuable to the western part of our country and very valuable to the Northeast. But it does nothing for the South. In fact, nothing in the American system is going to benefit the southern states. And they're going to be hurt. They're not going to like this. And this is going to start leading us towards a little bit more of division. But honestly, things are going pretty darn good during Monroe's presidency. I mean, we call it the era of good feeling, so you got to assume that it was good. But the other thing that's going to happen is we're going to take on a different role with regards to foreign policy. Oh my gosh, it's 8:11 already. Foreign policy, we're going to write what's known as the Monroe Doctrine. Now, the Monroe Doctrine is not actually an actual document. It was part of Monroe's State of the Union address to Congress. And John Quincy Adams, his Secretary of State, wrote this. But what the Monroe Doctrine says is we don't want any more European colonization taking place in the Western Hemisphere. And America is going to step up and stop it. We were concerned, now that all the wars were over in Europe, that the European countries like Spain and France and others would look to the Western Hemisphere and try to start coming over and colonizing more. And that would interfere with our economic trade within the region. We also had England who backed us up on this. This was huge. The fact that England backed us up on the Monroe Doctrine kind of gave us the muscle that we needed to get the rest of the world to follow suit. So basically what we said is, Europe, you stay on your side of the country. No colonization over here. You stay over there. We'll stay out of your drama. You stay out of our area over here, and all will be good. And England, you know, for the most part, Europe capitulated to us, and the Monroe Doctrine kind of became our foreign policy. Our foreign policy for the next, 20 to 98, 78 years. So, you know, this was huge, and it's still referred to a lot today as well. But the big thing I think that you need to come away with from Monroe's presidency is going to be the Missouri Compromise. This is probably the biggest piece of legislation, in my opinion, of Monroe's presidency. This is when we had the debate with regards to should Missouri come in as a free state or a slave state. And this is going to set us on the path of trying to maintain a balance of power between free and slave states in the Senate. We're going to have this going to be a large debate. You're going to have people who already have slaves in Missouri living there who says we should be able to keep our slaves. You're going to have people in the North who, you know, say we really don't want the South to have another state within their power configuration in the Senate, so we don't want Missouri to come in as a slave state. You're going to have different parts of legislation that's going to be introduced trying to, you know, prevent this from happening, and I'm drawing a blank on it right now. But basically, the Missouri Compromise says this: we are going to allow Missouri to come in as a slave state. In exchange, Maine will come in as a free state, maintaining the balance of power within the Senate. And from this point on, we are going to set the line, the 3630 line, as our point of no slavery will be allowed north of that line. Slavery will be allowed south of that line. And that's basically going to become the law until about 1850. And when you look at it, I mean, like I've mentioned before, I've said this I don't know how many times, but A bunch of times I've said that you look at it and it really looks like the southern states are kind of getting the short end of the stick. And really, in all truth, they are as far as land mass. But if you think about it, all this land up here that made free in the Missouri Compromise, that block of land, it's not very good agricultural land. So when the South looks at it, it's not something that's very appetizing to them. So this was a great solution. Of course, we talked about it. I keep saying we're going to talk about it in class, but I talked about it on my videos. Jefferson and others saw this as just kicking the can down the road. Actually, we did talk about this in class because I was testing your Latin on it. And we talked about how we said that basically this Missouri Compromise was like having the wolf by the ear, and the wolf was slavery. And as long as we held on to that ear, slavery could be controlled in our country. But once we let go of it, it's going to come back and bite us. And so Jefferson's like, man, as long as you're holding that ear, we're fine. But eventually you got to let go. And that's going to be basically the demise of our country. And he's like, that's why they call him the Sage of Monticello, because he saw what was coming. And a lot of other people did too. But definitely Missouri Compromise, probably one of the biggest pieces of legislation that you absolutely have to know this one. I can't say that enough. All right, it's going to take us into the 1820s and the corrupt bargain, which is going to bring us the presidency of John Quincy Adams. I'm going to go through this real quick. We had a tie. Not a tie, but we didn't have a winner in the election of 1824, so Quincy Adams is going to make a backroom deal with Henry Clay. Henry Clay is going to give him his states, which is going to give him the victory in this election, and it's going to tick off one certain Andrew Jackson, because Jackson's the one who loses because of the corrupt bargain. We're going into the 1820s. We have a brand new generation of congressmen. You know, we don't have any more of the founders. Monroe was the last, and now we have a whole new generation. The era of good feelings, guys, is coming to an end. That corrupt bargain just brings it to an end. Andrew Jackson, as soon as that Quincy Adams is declared the winner, he is going to start campaigning right away. And he is going to usher in what we know as Jacksonian democracy, which is going to push for the idea of universal male suffrage. As long as you're a guy and as long as you're white, you should be able to vote. There should be no property restrictions on you. And so through the 1820s, you're going to see a lot of the states remove property restrictions from their voting regulations. This is going to, I'm sorry, just a second. Oh, give me that. Sorry, you can always hear when they're chewing something they're not supposed to be chewing. So Jacksonian democracy is going to basically usher us into this new time period where Americans have more say in what's going on in our government. And it's because they can vote now. It used to be you had to own property. Now you don't have to anymore. So when we look at Jackson's presidency, the age of Jackson, we looked at him as either a hero or a villain. And there's a lot of things to consider as a villain. Now, a lot of people called him a hero because what he did for the common man. This common man politics, opening up, voting for everybody who's white and who's a man. It's all good. But, when it comes down to other things, he's going to have his conflicts. Now, I mentioned this today in class, the Tariff of Abominations, which was passed in 1828. This is the first thing Jackson has to deal with. Now, he did not pass the Tariff of Abominations. It was passed by John Quincy Adams, but Jackson has to deal with it. And he has to deal with it through the tunnel of South Carolina. South Carolina is threatening to nullify the Tariff of Abominations, meaning they're not going to follow it. They're going to ignore the law. And basically it comes down to a standoff between Jackson and John C. Calhoun. Now, Jackson was seen, he's the new Democrat. He started this new party called the Democrats, and he is actually a states' rights guy. So a lot of people thought, man, he's going to side with South Carolina on this, but he doesn't. Because while he believes in states' rights, he also believes in the union of our states. And so he is going to get Congress to pass the Force Bill. And the Force Bill said that it gave Jackson the authority, if he needed to take the army down to South Carolina and force them to start collecting this tariff. this tariff that was egregiously large. I mean, it was huge, and it really did hurt the South. But Jackson said, this is not the way we deal with this problem. We don't deal with problems by just saying we're not going to follow the law. You do not have that ability. So, when the force bill was passed, when he threatened to take the army down there, that's when our old buddy Henry Clay's wait, guys, I got an idea. Let's compromise. Let's just lower the tariff. And so that's what they did. And they did this compromise tariff, I think it was in 1832, that lowered the rate and basically got us out of this nullification crisis. Now, a lot of people see Jackson as a hero for how he handled this. Another thing they look at Jackson as a hero for was his war on the bank. Jackson saw the Second National Bank, which had been passed under the American system, had a 20-year charter, and it was coming up for renewal in 1836. Well, Henry Clay and others tried to get it passed sooner. They wanted to renew the bank's charter before it ran out. Well, Jackson saw that coming, and he declares war on the bank. He's like, no, this national bank, first of all, he kind of goes back to Jefferson's belief of, I don't think it's constitutional. But even if it is, it gives the rich way too much power. And because of that, a national bank is not the way to go. We need to have state-run banks because state-run banks are closer to the people and they're more helpful to the people, whereas the national bank just wants to help the elite, the rich and the wealthy. So he is actually going to veto the bill that was set up to recharter the national bank. He's fighting against the bank president. His name is Nicholas Biddle. They're the ones who are kind of going at it in the press. But Jackson's going to win out. He sees this as, this cartoon in the middle is him slaying the monster. Each head on that monster there represents one of the branches of the national bank. And he's going to slice off one at a time if he has to. So that was his war on the bank. Again, common man politics. That sounds good because he's saying the rich are evil. It's the haves versus the have-nots. And he's helping out the have-nots, everything. A lot of people said, though, this is going to come back and bite him. It's not going to bite him. It's going to bite the next guy. But it does have repercussions. Where Jackson is going to be seen as an absolute villain during his presidency. And I mean, we can go and find a lot of villainous stuff in his early years and stuff. But as president, it's going to be with the passage of the Indian Removal Act in 1830. This act was put in place because Jackson wanted to open up more land for development in our country, specifically in the northern part of Georgia heading west. Well, specifically in Georgia, that was Cherokee land. And the Indian Removal Act is going to basically force the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Seminole, and I can't remember the fifth tribe. I'm sorry. It was in the video. But it was going to remove them off their land. These were known as the 5 civilized tribes. And the Cherokee are going to fight back. The Cherokee are like, wait a minute. We have basically done everything, right. We've adopted, the American way of farming. We've adopted a government of our own that's similar, almost identical to the American government. We created a written language. And so the Cherokee, instead of, taking up a, physical fight against the Indian Removal Act, they're actually going to do it the American way. They're going to take it to court. And in Worcester versus Georgia, they are suing, saying that the state of Georgia does not have the authority to remove them off their land. John Marshall, our buddy, is going to rule in favor of the Cherokee Nation. He's going to say, wait a minute. The Cherokee Nation, or really any Native American nation, is a nation, an independent nation, and it's a nation within our country, a foreign entity, if you will. And a foreign entity must be dealt with the federal government. So no, Georgia has no authority to move the Native Americans from their land. Well, Jackson, when he hears this ruling, basically he was, the rumor is he said, well, if Marshall wants to make the law, then Marshall can go enforce it because I am not going to enforce that law, because he wanted that land to be open for American settlement. That's what the manifest destiny is really starting to play into our American persona now. Well, this is going to lead to the Trail of Tears. Now, the Trail of Tears does not occur during Jackson's presidency. It occurs during Martin Van Buren's, the guy who comes after him. But it's Jackson's actions. It's the actions of the Congress under Jackson who are going to lead to the Trail of Tears. There's a lot more with Jackson you might want to be familiar with. If you're familiar with his kitchen cabinet, that was his close advisors who he talked to. They actually met in his kitchen. There was his relationship with people in Washington. He just didn't have any time for them. Just a lot of it, his relationship with the press. Remember, his wife died during hi Robert, how are you? During the campaign, so he always blamed the press for his the death of his wife. So he's going to have kind of a real love-hate relationship with the press. I don't know what else I can tell you about Jackson. I mean, he was a tough old dude, and he was going to do it his way, whether anybody liked it or not. And a lot of people did not like it, and to this day, a lot of people still don't like it. So, this is the guy who killed the bank, and yet he's on the $20 bill. For how much longer, I'm not sure. Harriet Tubman is supposed to replace him, but that's kind of on hold, so who knows when that's going to happen. But it will. It'll happen. All right, that takes us into the 1830s. We're wrapping things up now. I told you there was going to be repercussions for Jackson slaying the bank, and the repercussions are the Panic of 1837. When the bank is destroyed, basically when it knows it's not going to get renewed, they start calling in all their loans. Because if the bank is going to close down, they're going to lose all that money. So they start calling on all their loans. Well, Jackson had also taken or withdrawn a lot of the national bank money and put it in state banks. And so state banks start calling in loans too. But they don't want paper money, because when the state banks started getting more power, you started seeing currency being printed in all the different states. And none of it had any value in other states. So what happened was Jackson issued what's known as the Specie Circular to alleviate any problems of different currency and everything to pay off loans. Basically, the Specie Circular said from now on, all bank loans have to be paid off with hard currency, silver and gold. Most people don't have a stack of silver and gold in their house. So how do they pay back their loans? And the simple answer is they don't. And so people started defaulting on their loans. Well, when people started defaulting on their loans, land started to sell for cheap. And so you have all these speculators or all these investors who say, hey, let's go buy some of this cheap land, and then we can turn around and sell it for more later. And what they did is they went to the bank and they're like, we're going to buy land as an investment, and then we're going to sell it. And when we sell that land, we'll take the money and pay you back. The problem was so many farms and so many landowners were defaulting on their loans that the price of land just crashed, because there was so much land available for purchase that the price just dropped. And all these land speculators who had invested early in land now couldn't sell it. Or if they could, they weren't making enough to pay off their bank loans. And if a bank is not getting paid back its loans, it closes. And when banks close, the flow of currency ends, because there's no more loans going out. If there's no more loans going out, businesses can't build. And if businesses can't build, they're not hiring anybody. And if they're not hiring anybody, then people are not, they have no money to get by. And if they're not making any money, they can't pay off the loans that they have either. So it just starts this circular process. And that's what leads to the Panic of 1837, which Martin Van Buren inherits as the next president. Van Buren was Jackson's choice to be the next president. And what he got was a big barrel of crap, basically. His nickname is Martin Van Ruin, because people blamed him for the economic ruin of our country. And basically it wasn't his fault. It was Jackson's fault and the previous administration. But Martin Van Buren had no answer for it. And that was the big thing. He didn't have an answer for this economic collapse. That's going to take us into the 1840s and the election of William Henry Harrison, same guy from the Battle of Tippecanoe. He ran with John Tyler. John Tyler was a former Democrat who's now claiming to be a Whig, and they're going to run with a campaign slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Because Harrison came away as a hero after the Battle of Tippecanoe. Not going to go any further into that because I'm going to pick that up because that starts our discussion on Manifest Destiny when we get into period 5 right after our Thanksgiving break. But one side note, because I didn't share this with you guys in the videos, but the Battle of Tippecanoe, because of that battle, Tecumseh is going to supposedly curse William Henry Harrison and basically say that it starts this curse that every president who is elected in a 0 year dies in office. William Henry Harrison will be elected in 1840, and when he takes office, he will serve for 28 days, and he will die of pneumonia, and that will start the curse. And so then the next president's going to be elected in a 0 year is going to be Abraham Lincoln. 1860, we all know what happens to him. Next will be 1880, Garfield, he will die in office. 1900, McKinley, he will die in office. 1920, and I'm drawing a blank on the president. He was replaced by Coolidge, but who was the president? I can't remember, but he dies in office. 1940, FDR, he dies in office. 1960, John F. Kennedy, he dies in office. 1980, the curse is broken with Ronald Reagan. He's shot, but he survives. All right, guys, there you go. That's pretty much took me way longer than I expected. An hour into it. There's everything. What is this? It wasn't a conspiracy. It was Tecumseh's curse, Afrin, and it was true until the great Reagan broke it. Relax, Afrin, because Reagan broke the curse. Once Reagan broke the curse, it hasn't happened since. So you can relax. It'll be fine. All right. Bush too was elected in 2000. He survived, so we're good to go. I'm not going to get into politics, but maybe the curse is coming back. I don't know. I'm just teasing. All right. What questions do you guys have? Where's my cheat book? Come on, guys. You got to have some questions. I'm going to look something up for you guys real quick while you're doing this. Where are my glasses? Right here. Oh, yeah, JFK and Lincoln's assassination. Yeah, I've heard that where Lincoln, Kennedy, and JFK, you flip-flopping back and forth. Like Kennedy's secretary's name was Lincoln and Lincoln's secretary's name was Kennedy. Kennedy was shot from a warehouse, and the guy ran to a theater. Lincoln was shot in a theater and the guy ran to a warehouse. All that kind of stuff, is going on. So, there's a whole list of it and everything. So, you can have fun with it. But, all right, let me look here. Something I wanted to look up and make sure I get it right. There we go. 154. I'm just sitting here waiting for some questions, guys. Okay. Hey, Tatiana, if you're still on, I'm going to go back to Dartmouth College and just wrap it up real easily for you. Basically, what Marshall ruled, he said that a public entity or that a state cannot go in and change a charter of a private institution. So Dartmouth College had a charter. They chartered themselves as a private institution. When the state came in and tried to overrule that charter, he said they couldn't do it because they're a private corporation and the state government does not have the authority to overrule that charter. There you go. What will the timeline be for this exam? Oh, what will the timeline, do you mean like the time period it covers? 1800 to 1848. Do you need to know about social hierarchy or the income gap? What you need to know, Tatiana, about social hierarchy and the income gap is that when Jackson came in, that it was this perception of the haves versus the have-nots. We started to see during the market revolution. I didn't even talk about the market revolution, but know the market revolution. But when we saw the market revolution, we started to see the rich kind of get richer, and we started to see more of a division, an income gap between the rich and the poor. So what Jackson does is when he comes in and he's going to step in on that, that's who he's going to battle. He's going to battle that social hierarchy, that the elites have all the power in politics and stuff like that. Whereas, with, universal male suffrage, that is going to be alleviated, and that's going to break down the hierarchy. Yeah, I'll put Flynn up here in just a minute. and his name is spelled Flynn. So you're not going to fail, but you might get a C. So I want to get you an A. So don't worry about it. He's around here someplace. Hey, Flynn, can you come here? Come here, Flynn. Come here. You good? Come here. Oh, see, he always thinks I'm calling him to play. But come here, bud. Come here, Flynn. Come here. Come on. I know it hurts your legs. Come here. He knows I'm going to try to get him up. Don't worry, I'll get him up here. Ask me a question, though. Ready? Can you get up here? Come here, sweetheart. Ready? Come here. Oh, there's my boy. There he comes. All right, here comes. There's Flynn. He's got his teddy bear. See? Let's put this down. All right. Here is your A dog right here. There he is. Isn't he cute? Can you smile for him? There you go. All right. Here's my baby. He's my buddy. You all misspelled his name. I know. That's okay. He's not a very good speller, so he doesn't know. I won't tell him. Right? Right? Yes. Okay. All right. Any other question, guys? Yes. Yes. Got it. All right. I'm going to take that as no. I'm going to check and make sure I didn't miss any text messages. Oh, here we go. See, I missed. Oh, see what you did? Careful. I did have a text message. Sorry. Okay. Yes. 2 good questions. All right. The first question came, Andre said, is the test going to have anything about the Industrial Revolution? And see, that's one thing I see. You just tagged it there. I saw it. Yeah, we are going to have a day. Quinn, I've been meaning to do that for a while. But here's the deal. The Industrial Revolution, what you need to know, Andres, and everyone listen to this. The biggest result of the War of 1812 is going to be that America becomes industrialized, and that's going to usher us into the market revolution. And you're going to see all these new inventions come out. I'm not going to be asking a lot of questions about what's this invention, what's that invention. We already did our haikus. You guys know those. But what you really need to know is how that changed the trajectory of our country, and and how that changed the role of people in society. And Andres, you and I kind of talked about this morning, but the Lowell factory system is going to be a result of that. And the Lowell factory system was really the first opportunity for women to work outside the home. Lowell factories, this is Lowell, Massachusetts. They're going to take, the spinning mule, I believe, and they're going to turn that into a factory system, and they're going to hire young women who will come and work in this factory making textiles. And Lowell, Massachusetts was kind of like this experiment because the women lived and worked in Lowell, and they were known as the Lowell Factory Girls. So that's going to be an effect of the industrial age or the Industrial Revolution. Then I had another text message from I think it was from the Lowell Mills. Noah, that's what I was just talking about. Noah just texted me and asked about the Lowell Mills. That's what those are. The Lowell factory system, the Lowell Mills. That's women working in the textile industry. Now listen, guys, when I talk about that, don't think of that as this big, huge movement for women's rights. That's coming, and you're going to see women working more, but it's not going to be the norm. These are young girls who are just looking for a job. They send the money home to their family as soon as they can. They get married, they settle down, they have a family. This is not some movement for women's independence. Someone asked me about the Seminole War, and I'll touch on that real quickly. I will not forget about that. Bailey is asking me a question about transcendentalism and the social reforms. Be familiar with those. Know about the Seneca Falls Convention, 1848. Know the big players in the reform movement. I'm sorry, I didn't even have it on the slide, so I didn't even think of talking about it. Transcendentalism. I wouldn't spend a lot of time focused on that. What I would do, honestly, take your notes, Bailey, maybe just have a chart of the movement and who, what it did and who was the key player. So you might have the women's movement. Well, that's Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. The education system, that's Horace Greeley. The Grimke sisters for abolitionists. I love the Grimke sisters. So know that, and I think you'll be fine, okay? And I asked about the Seminole War. The Seminole War, that was the first. There was 3 Seminole Wars. The first Seminole War is going to involve Andrew Jackson and this was right after the War of 1812, and it was believed, and it wasn't believed, it was true. Free or escaped slaves were escaping into Florida, and they were hiding amongst the Seminole people. And so what's going to happen is Andrew Jackson is going to be, he's going to be charged with taking his men down into Florida basically to protect the border, to stop slaves from crossing. But he takes it a step further. He is going to actually invade Florida. And invading Florida, he is going to start the first Seminole War. And this is actually what leads to the Adams-Onis Treaty. John Quincy Adams, horrible president, just because of the corrupt bargain, no one took him seriously. But as the Secretary of State, he brought in so much new land. He was a foreign policy genius. He signed the Adams-Onis Treaty. He went to the Anglo-American Convention, and he set up we're going to share the Oregon Territory with Great Britain. He helped oversee the Rush-Bagot Treaty, which set up the border between us and Canada up in New England, following the War of 1812. So the first Seminole War was about that. The second Seminole War, though, is going to be the Seminole Indians fighting against their forced removal after the Indian Removal Act was passed. And they're different than the Cherokee. They are actually going to try to fight and stay within their land, but of course we know they're going to lose. So there's a third Seminole War, but you don't need to know about that one, or you don't need to be familiar with that. So hopefully that answers that question there for you, Anna. I hope so. Afrin, yes, John Marshall is pretty much on the court for all of period 4. Absolutely. He is the Chief Justice. So, good questions. Thank you. I love answering questions because it helps me remember what I forgot to talk about. Anything else, my young people? All right, cool beans. Nothing's coming through. So I think we're just going to start wrapping this up. Hey, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I don't know if it's going to get me anything, but, I might as well try. Other than that, 29 multiple choice questions, 1 short answer, 50 minutes to get it all done. What was John Calhoun's positive good? Tatiana, this was an argument. Here we go, more questions. Cool. The positive good basically is what Calhoun and others in the South are going to start arguing. And the idea is that slavery was actually good for the slaves, because they're going to start making the argument that if slavery ended, if we all of a sudden just gave all these people their freedom, they would be lost. They would not be able to clothe themselves, find a job, feed themselves, find shelter, anything like that. They need us, basically, is what John C. Calhoun said. So we're doing a good thing for them. And this is going to become more of a prevalent argument when we get to the 1850s. Calhoun kind of introduces it now, but it's kind of one of those things where, it's one of those things when you're wrong, but you don't want to admit you're wrong. So you're going to find every way you possibly can to prove you're right, even if it doesn't make sense at all. That's what the positive good was all about. It's good for the slaves to be slaves, because otherwise they would be lost without us. And he also brought in, with the Second Great Awakening, we're introducing them to Christianity and stuff like that. So we're helping them that way as well. A couple more text questions came in. Let's see. Yes, Andres, you will. Don't worry about that. Noah asked, wow, here we go. Did internal improvements like the Cumberland Road and the Erie Canal occur during Monroe's presidency? Yes and no. They're going to get their start during the Madison's presidency, but they're going to continue into Monroe's presidency. That's part of the internal improvements of the American system, although the Erie Canal was not built with American system money, but the idea of infrastructure, that all is taking place during this time. So yeah, basically you're looking at it in the early, mid 1810s up until about the early 1820s during that time period. Another question, do we need to know a whole lot about the Mexican-American War? No, you don't, and that's my fault because I put that on this review and it's supposed to be on the next review. Technically, 1848 is when the Mexican-American War starts, but it doesn't end until 1849, 1850, so we're going to talk about that in the next unit. So if you have not filled that in on your review sheet, don't. You don't have to fill in that box yet. So don't worry about the Mexican-American War or Texas annexation. Quinn, the Cumberland Road, that's also known as the National Road. That's the first interstate road that we basically built in our country, and that's going to help allow trade between the West and the Northeast. Okay? Let's see, any other questions come in? Do you need to know the details about Henry Clay's American system? Know the parts of it. Know that it's the Bank of the United States, that it's internal improvements, that it's a tariff to protect American industry. Know, why that was all put in place, okay? The Second National Bank, the bank is put in place to try to build America's economy after the Embargo Act. Internal improvements is infrastructure, trying to create transfer routes within America for trade within America and being able to get goods back and forth. And then the tariff was put in place to help build American industry, because coming out of the War of 1812, we saw the rise of industry. Now we want to focus our efforts on getting that industry to grow as much as we possibly can. Okay? All right. Oh, whew, anything else? Oh, here we go. Oh, you bet, no problem. All right, it is 8:47. So we have 13 more minutes before it's my bedtime. Yeah, I go to bed at 9. So, no, it's my pleasure. You're welcome. You already got to see Flynn, so we're good. So I guess that's it. If you came in late, the recording will be available on YouTube. If you've sat here the whole time, good for you. You stuck with me. Tatiana, I apologize again for the confusion about Dartmouth College, but hopefully you got it now. No, it's my pleasure. You're welcome. All right, guys. You have a fantastic evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Wow, I still got 39 people watching. That's not too bad. So you guys stuck with it. I appreciate that. All right, guys. I just closed that out, and now you have a black screen. So I'm out of here. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye-bye.